What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Friday, June 27th, 2025. We're recording this on a Thursday, but it'll be hitting your feeds on Friday morning. And I got an awesome episode in store for you guys today. If you're an Oregon football fan, I can all but guarantee you will love this conversation because I am joined by one of my best buddies on the Oregon beat, and that is Erik Skopil of Duck Territory. Erik, how you doing, man? Thanks for being here. It is a pleasure to have you.
Oh man, it's great. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This will be fun. We haven't done one of these in a minute, and I'm curious to see kind of like if our thoughts align on a lot of things. We've texted a little bit about certain things, so I'm curious, but should be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. No, I'm fired up to have you on and to dive into some Oregon football here. If you guys have listened to Erik and I before, we are both Zags, so he definitely gets some bonus points for that. But I just love reading what he has to write and hearing what he has to say. So we're gonna hop right into it. We have a couple of different topics that we're gonna kick around, and then I'm sure we'll just improv a little bit and see where this bad boy takes us. So Erik, let's kind of dive in here. Right now, end of June, July is on the horizon. So fall camp isn't quite around the corner, but that is basically the next step in the calendar. Obviously, there's Big Ten Media Day
Mhm.
in Vegas. I don't know if you're going to go. I might try to pull up to that. But I guess just kind of the thing I want to hop into is the biggest question marks or the biggest questions facing this Oregon program right now. You were at the spring game, and then I just kind of wanted to toss that one up and see what you thought.
God, there's so many questions, by the way, Max. Like I feel like there are more things to deliberate and discuss in the off season, which makes for good content for people like us than most years. But that also makes our job kind of more difficult because like I left the spring game, you probably did as well, with like more questions than answers. Like I still don't know a lot of these position groups, like how it's going to shake out. And I think that makes for like hopefully a really fun off season, hopefully a lot of cool fall camp content. We'll see what Dan and staff wants to get into and actually like tell us on record. It's probably going to be somewhat limited as usual, but like I don't know. I just look around the roster and I'm like, aside from like a couple spots where they've added seemingly like kind of plug and play transfers, like there's like a lot of things that you look at and go I always the first thing is always corner for me because I just feel like they're replacing all five starters in the secondary. They went out and have signed these guys just probably almost better than I do, but these big time 5-star caliber cornerback prospects the last couple cycles, it's like how ready is an Eam Offord or an Ife Obadegwu or Dakota Fields or you know Brandon Finney, Dorian Brew, all these guys. Like how ready are these guys to play? Is it a case where we're going to see the youth movement there kind of step forward and present one of the more at least physically imposing cornerback groups Oregon's had recently? Or will like the Theron Johnson, Jaden Kennedys, these transfers, like Jaleel Florence is back, like some of these more veteran guys kind of step forward. So like that's one for me. I think the defensive line, I have kind of similar question marks. They do, bring back Amari, who played quite a bit last year, but like just across the board on basically every position group on the roster, I feel like I think this is probably what's going to happen. And they're these young, exciting guys, but like at the same time, it's kind of like we'll probably know a lot more August 30th. So, and then the other one that just jumps to mind that has been kind of a question recently is like, what happens now that Evan Stewart's kind of out of the picture? Like, that was a really easy kind of like, hey, who's going to lead the team in receiving? Well, it's probably this guy who last year was third in receiving and who had like 4 monster games. And when it was clicking, it was great. And now it's kind of like, could a tight end lead the team in receiving? I just did the research. That's only happened twice in the last 50 years, and not once since I think it was like 1986 was the last time a tight end led Oregon in receiving. So like, could Kenyon be the guy who breaks that streak and does it? That wouldn't surprise me. What do we think about DeCorian Moore? The true freshman. Like obviously everyone knows he's super talented. Is he ready? Like we just watched Jeremiah Smith do absolutely crazy things. I don't think anybody wants to put those expectations on him, but like the opportunity's there if he's ready for a big season like that. So, and then of course quarterback, which I know we're gonna obviously we have to talk about. Is Dante? Is it as simple as it's Dante Moore, or have Austin Novosad and even Luke Moga in the spring game done enough to kind of make this a more complicated conversation? So yeah, kind of an open-ended question. There's like 3 or 4 things that pop to at least in my mind. I guess if we want to get further down like the rabbit hole, and probably listeners don't care quite as much, is like punting. Like what was going on in that spring game, like with
You're the special
Ross.
teams guy, Eric. You
Always
always
have
have
been.
been.
Yeah, like is it like Ross James is like the school's leading. He's a record holder in yards per punt average. Probably surprises some people who haven't paid attention to those kind of records. Like I think his average is like 47 yards per punt, mid 46 or something. And nobody else in school history's had over 44. And yet, like I think he got demoted. I think they went and added a guy to play over him in James Reynolds Ferguson from Boise. So like, yeah, I guess there's 5 things, and I probably could have. If you would ask me for 5 more, I'd probably have 5 more somewhere up here.
No, I love it. I love it. We can, I mean, maybe we won't hit on all of those, but we can certainly dive into to them. Corner, I think, is a great place to start here, just so we can kind of push quarterback a little bit down the line. Because that one's kind of easy, right? But cornerback is so fascinating to me because it is a position that Oregon has just recruited the heck out of in recent years. But to that point, we haven't seen a lot of these guys. I mean, just look at one of the highest rated signees that they had in the 23 class. I think Roderick Pleasant. He's going to UCLA now. Granted, that was a much different situation. He's a track guy as well, and he didn't really see the field too much at Oregon. But now, as the time has gone by, we've seen more of these, 6 foot plus, 190, 200-pound corners get added into the fray here. And now that you lose all of your starting corners from last year, you're in a position to cut these guys loose. And I'd be very curious to see how Jaleel Florence would have stacked up with the other corners last year had he been healthy for the entirety of the year. But that obviously wasn't the case. So it feels like it's pretty safe to think that he'll slide into one of those starting cornerback roles. I would have to imagine. But boy, I mean, the coaching staff isn't going to make it easy on him. Just look at all this talent that they've brought in. Dakota Fields is one of the guys I'm the most excited to see. Yes, part of it is because I covered him out in Southern California, but he had that interception in the spring game, and then we didn't see any of him last year because he got injured. So, like, is he going to be a guy that we see a lot of? And then Ifeoma Badegwu, my favorite quote I've gotten from a source about him is that he just kind of plays with a screw loose, and God, Oregon fans got to be happy about that physicality from a defensive back. So there's so much talent in that room, Eric, but really aside from Jaleel Florence and probably to a lesser degree, because we haven't really seen them at Oregon as much, Theron Johnson, not a lot of proven commodities. And I think that you can be afraid of that or you can be excited about it. But I'm choosing to be excited about it because the closest situation that I can think of to this year, Eric, at the cornerback spot is probably the bit of that 2017 season when you had Thomas Graham Jr. just kind of get thrown into the fire a little bit. But the biggest difference is he was getting on the field, to his credit, he became an NFL caliber dude, but he was getting thrown out there because he was the best that Oregon had. And it was like, all right, here you go. Like, do your best. But now you have all-American caliber guys, 5-star caliber guys in the secondary that you can turn to. And that just, I think I want to put my faith in the staff to have at least one of those, young true freshmen probably in the mix or ready to contribute.
Here's the stat. I just was pulling up PFF to confirm it. Oregon played about 1,700 or so snaps in terms of outside corners last year. Only 31 of those snaps are back. And that was all Sione Lalea, who probably doesn't get talked about much in this conversation because
we should.
He's a big time JUCO kid, but it's easy to overlook him for the 5-star high school kids. Like his name has to be in the mix. I agree with you on Florence. But the point of that stat is just like you think about, like, okay, so they basically returned 0 guys who contributed last year at corner. And yet I agree with you. Like, I'm choosing to be excited. I'm choosing to be optimistic because it's hard not to when you look at the physical attributes these guys present. And even in the spring game, like, again, small offerings, they rotated a lot. Like Naeem made an awesome pass breakup that saved a touchdown. I thought Theron, like looked the part of like what you expect for a veteran corner. Like he was on DeCorian quite a bit. And aside from, I think maybe one catch, early on in that game, like really held his own. Like, so, and Jaleel's like the one where I guess that's just, I think so highly of him. And I was so encouraged by what he looked like in the spring game. But it is a case of like, we just saw Noah Whittington kind of have, I would say, a really kind of up and down season at running back coming off of a knee injury. that is, I think, pretty similar to what Jaleel was dealing with. So, that throws a little bit of a wrench in it. Like, I think you're right. Like, if Jaleel was healthy in 24 and he was coming back as a senior in 25, it'd be really easy to be like, there's your alpha. And the big question is Theron Johnson? They might have even taken Theron maybe, but like, is it Theron Johnson on the opposite side, or is it one of the young guys? But now it really does feel like if Jaleel is in any way hindered by this injury and maybe isn't, what he was in 23 and what he could have been, with a couple of years more of development, you do open the door to, gosh, could one of these young guys, and I'll be honest, like, I'm not going to be surprised at all if one of those guys maybe isn't starting day one, but by the end of the year. And that's part of the reason too, like, Max, this is maybe just a conversation point across the board. Like, I look at this season and go, I'm not going to be surprised if it's a little like last year, where there's some growing pains, some ups and downs. And last year was more because it was a transfer quarterback who hadn't really been in the system. It was an offensive line that got hit with a bunch of unexpected injuries and weird kind of outcomes early on, and I should say late on in a fall camp. And so they started slow. This year for me, it's like I could see them starting slow and being a really tough out late, in particular because all these young guys who maybe they aren't the day one starters, but by mid-October, after the second bye week, have really put themselves in a spot where it's like you can't not play this guy. And Naeem or Finney or Iffy or Dakota, Trey, yeah, I mean, all these guys, and there's so many names. One of those guys could absolutely fill in and be that player, be a real difference maker by the time you get to kind of the real meat of the schedule there. So I've written, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon runs the table like after Penn State, just because they get hot and especially some of these younger guys just kind of start to develop.
Yeah, I'm getting so excited just talking about it, Erik. I think for Oregon, it's like, I'm not saying I'm tempering my expectations, but like when you look at the youth, like there's gonna be growing pains, of course, but these guys are like just all the talent in the world, but they just need snaps, and it's you can only make up for that lack of experience in talent so much. Like, there's only a handful of dudes where it's like, this guy hasn't even sniffed a college snap, but he's so gifted, he can just make it happen. Like, that is rare in college football. So I think I'm right with you. I think that they might take some licks early on, but like get some snaps under their belt, and that's going to make them dangerous. And they could definitely be one of those teams that others just don't want to face late in the year or in the playoff. We have to see what happens with that. So corner, we could talk about just, I think, ad nauseum, but that's definitely one that I'm excited about. Kingston Lopa comes back at safety. So you have a little bit more of some familiarity there. And then obviously Dylan Thieneman comes over from Purdue. So I don't want to wade too deep into the secondary waters, because I know we're trying to keep this thing around 30 minutes. Let's hop over to the other side of the ball real quick, if you don't mind, because that was one of your other questions, is just what is Oregon going to do now at wide receiver, given that Evan Stewart is expected to miss some degree of time. I think some people have said they fear that it's maybe even the whole regular season. There's not a ton of clarity, and I mean, who even knows if Dan's going to answer a question like that at the Big Ten Media Days?
I know, and the answer is he won't.
yeah, I wouldn't. Right. I wouldn't expect it. So just let's kind of expect that he's going to miss some period of time. I think that obviously, I mean, you hear that as an Oregon fan, and you're kind of devastated. I wouldn't say definitely not single-handedly won them the Ohio State game, but I can tell you, if he doesn't play the way he did, they don't win the Ohio State game. I mean, he was unguardable that day and had some really good performances throughout the year. Maybe not as consistent as you would have expected a player of his caliber to be throughout the year, and that's not a knock saying he's a bad player. I just think you'd like to have it put together a little bit more. But now that he is not going to be with the Ducks for some stretch of time, we have to look at who's in contention here. And you have some guys returning, like Justice Lowe, who's back. He was a fairly steady presence for Oregon, maybe not the prolific playmaker that some of these other guys are. Gary Bryant Jr. was banged up pretty much all of last year, it felt like, and you're not really sure what you're going to get from him because he's battled injury so much. And then Malik Benson, Jurion Dickey, Kyler Casper. I think Kyler Casper and Jurion Dickey are two of my most intriguing wideouts for this upcoming season, because it feels like they're entering make or break years. The Ducks need to get some production out of those two guys who were super gifted coming out of high school. And then, of course, you have to talk about Ticorian Moore, Cooper Perry is a guy I'm excited about as well. So you have no shortage of options, but man, you could throw out, I don't even know how many depth charts, and I could say, yeah, maybe that'll happen. I don't know.
Yeah, and this is where college football as a developmental sport becomes really difficult. Like you were talking about earlier with snaps being so important. Like it's also really helpful for us in terms of evaluating, like kind of the point we're talking about at corner of like none of these guys played at corner last year. So who am I supposed to suggest is going to be ready to play real games on Saturdays? Like, we can talk about the spring game and look good there, but like I think the takeaways are sometimes limited in a spring game, especially when the teams are kind of mixed the way Dan and company likes to have them mixed. And that's obviously the case at receiver. Like I loved what Justice Lowe provided Oregon in a pinch last year when Tez went down. Like he was a guy who I had really no sense of what he'd be at Oregon. I remember when he was a high school recruit interviewing him, and growing up, he's more into like skateboarding and track than he was football. Like I think he was one of the guys you ask, like, so was your dream to go to Oregon and play football? And it was kind of like, this kid's from just up the road in like Portland. And he was like, no, not really. Like I wasn't even a football fan. Like I was like, did you go to Autzen growing up? He's like, no, not really. Like I wasn't a football fan. And then he gets here and it's like, there's so many talented guys. He's down the depth chart, and then he comes out and plays really well. So what do we make of that? And in particular, of like, I don't think it's fair to ask him or like really many of these guys to be an alpha. Like the routes Justice was running last year were not routes that he's going to be asked to run this year if you're expecting him to be like their X receiver and like run, to be like the focal point of an offense. And frankly, like, I don't know if he can separate that way. I don't know how reliable he would be in that role. And I think that's the part, again, with it being a developmental sport, that's difficult of like, I want to say this guy's ready to take that step, but who knows? And you just brought up two guys that are top of mind with that as well, with Kyler and Jurian, where it's like, we know what these guys were as high school recruits, like really highly regarded. Like Jurian's one of the top high school wide receiver prospects school's ever signed. And yet he has like 2 or 3 catches for like 12 yards through a couple of years of being here. Like, when does that development, like, where is he at in that process? Like, is this just a case of, they got the evaluations wrong? I kind of doubt it. Or is this a case of like, it's going to come together and Oregon's going to benefit a lot this year? And really, like, he feels like, along with Decorian, and I guess I throw Jeremiah McClellan in there just from
I forgot to mention him too.
Yeah, from just like a pedigree perspective, maybe Blake Benson, because he was like a top JUCO prospect. I'm just thinking of guys that when they were coming out, people thought like they could be more than like a supplementary pass catching option, because Oregon needs that now without Evan. And that's certainly what Evan is capable of being. So I think that's the difficulty, is like, and that's why I've probably been more keen than some, maybe not too many, on Decorian maybe being the leader at receiver, just because he has that track record as a high school prospect in Texas. Like, he was the alpha playing, and about the highest level of competition you could ask for, down there in the Dallas, Fort Worth area. I just look at him and go like, gosh, it feels like some of that should translate, but again, it's still developmental, and who knows how ready he is and whatnot. So I find receiver to be fascinating. And again, I'll throw out the name earlier that I brought up of like, could we just see Kenyon Sadiq become a focal point in an offense, unlike past seasons? And I brought this up in a story I wrote a little bit ago, kind of suggesting like maybe what could happen with Evan out. Like, you look at what Penn State's been historically, and it's not like pre-Tyler Warren, they just threw the ball to the tight end every down. You look at what Georgia was pre-Brock Bowers, post-Brock Bowers. It wasn't like they just loaded up and threw the tight end every down. Colston Loveland at Michigan. He's not as big of a name, but Max Clare at Purdue, who's now at Ohio State, I think is going to be a big name. But like, Oregon's played several teams the last couple of years where it's like the focal point of the pass offense was a tight end in a school that's like not traditionally built that way. Like, why can't Will Stein do that with Kenyon this year? If you say he's your most gifted pass catcher, why can't you cater an offense that way? And a player like Kenyon, is maybe even more capable of doing that than some of those guys, because he's so much more versatile. Not to take anything away. Tyler Warren, the way they used him as kind of like a pseudo quarterback, as a, have him under center as a runner. I don't know if they'll do that with Kenyon, but Kenyon's certainly capable of playing like inline, playing outside, playing in the slot. Like, I just think there's so much versatility there that, like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we come away being like, we were overthinking this with the Evan Stewart search, question. And it's simple as Kenyon Sadiq's their most talented pass catcher on the team, and the offense is just going to funnel through him a lot more than we're used to at that position.
I love that you mentioned the versatility with Kenyon, because obviously that's something that is a common talking point, but like, you also said pass catcher. And this is probably too much to say right now, but by the end of the season, we could very well, Eric, find ourselves saying Kenyon Sadiq is Oregon's best weapon,
Yeah.
regardless of how he's used, whether that's sweeps, tosses, tunnel screens, using him as an inline blocker. He can certainly hold his own as a blocker. I saw a lot of clips of him in a post the other day. So like that's something you have to account for. And then also just in the vein on DeCorian, like I'm more as excited as you are, just as excited as you are, just as excited as fans are to see that guy hit the field. But like this sounds like it's pessimistic, but it's like Oregon's gotten elite wide receiver recruits before, and it hasn't necessarily translated. That's not to say it isn't going to happen, but like it just makes you think like, okay, they've brought some transfers in, and when that happens, I think that some of these high school guys tend to get lost in the mix. So I'm not trying to be overly critical. I think that's just the reality of Oregon's approach in recent years, is that they have kind of relied on some of these portal receivers who have done awesome things. But as a result of that, you find yourself in this situation and you're like, oh, hey, I mean, how likely is it that a Dylan Gresham, who we also haven't mentioned, who had a great spring game, like he could do something this next year, but he hasn't seen a lot of snaps. So like that's like easily one of the most complicated questions that we're trying to dive into here. And let's not forget, Eric, Oregon's trying to deal with all of this with a new wide receivers coach in Ross Douglas, who I'm super excited to see. And we have no reason to doubt his ability, but God, you can't help but think like that is just a tough hand to be dealt when you just got on staff.
Yeah, and just from like an Oregon taking a step back perspective, like I think most fans would be like, I would love to have had Junior Adams in this position as a more veteran position coach who's got a different history of development and kind of, I guess fitting the pieces into the puzzle. We'll see right away, and I'm with you. I'm optimistic. Like I remember when Alik Terry got here, there was a lot of concerns. That line had to be reshuffled and replaced. They lost a lot of guys. Even last year they had injury early with Bedford going down. And then they ended up being Joe Moore Award finalists his first 2 seasons here. I'm optimistic that Dan has found the right guy in Ross Douglas, but I will say, like, we're going to learn right away, like, what his strengths are and how capable he is. And he, as we've said time and time again, the cupboard's far from bare. Like, we're talking about 4 and 5. There's 2 5-star kids in this mix. There's 3 or 4 or 5 other high-end 4-star, like top 100 prospects in this group. Like, it's not like you're right. He's inherited a tough hand in that you lost the guy you thought was your alpha, like, right after spring. I don't even think he really practiced a whole lot from my understanding. Wish I could tell you based on evidence of me being at practice, but that's the only time I'll bring that up on this podcast. But at least it's a bummer he lost Stewart, but he does have a lot of talent around here. And again, it's going to come down to like, how ready is this guy to take it over? Like I fully expect the receiving room is going to be ready. But like the other component here is, you mentioned new wide receivers coach, also new quarterback. And like, gosh, if you're Dante, you're probably, we can talk this through if we don't want to just hand the job to Dante, which I think I just subconsciously kind of did.
Sure.
Like, this is tough on Dante too, because you'd love to have Evan Stewart out there, who's a bit of a more proven commodity than just about any of these guys, and who at least has shown the ability with some inconsistencies to really be an alpha on a certain day, to really separate against elite corner talent. Like that's the thing where I go, that's why I come back to DeCorian of like, I know he can do that. We've seen him do that as a high school player. I expect to be able to do that in college. There's just not a ton of other guys in this roster. And for Dante, it might require him to make some more tight window throws and to fit the ball into places wouldn't necessarily have had to with Evan available. So it's tough on the whole passing game as a whole, but I think if you're just being honest, like there's still so much talent here and there's so many different outcomes where, during June and July, we're going, how's this going to look? And then by August and maybe, into September and October, we're going like, okay, they're going to be just okay here.
I think you definitely see the reason for optimism at the position. And I think that we're also just introducing not the reasons to be pessimistic or worried, but like why there is maybe some cause for concern, or at least a little bit of uncertainty as they go about addressing the Evan Stewart injury. And I love the dynamic that you brought in there with how it affects Dante or whoever ends up at quarterback. So there's so much more that we can get to in this pod, but I had 2 more like just mini topics, I guess, that I wanted to hit on before we got out of here, Eric. We'll see if we can do it in about 5-ish minutes. I want to talk about the quarterback room. And then I also want to talk about kind of some of Oregon's NIL approach that we've been texting about recently. So we kind of segue a little bit into the quarterback room first, maybe. it feels like everybody is handing Dante Moore the job. I would agree that he is probably the guy who is, positioned to take over now that Dylan Gabriel is with the Browns in the NFL. But I've heard some really good things about Austin Novosad as well, and clearly he is no slouch. And I'm just happy that he's still in the room. I mean, I wasn't necessarily expecting him to stick around. And then you also have Luke Moga, who has such limited reps that we've seen with our own two eyes. But every time we see that guy, he kind of just feels like he's lightning in a bottle type of quarterback. And he's really taken steps forward as a passer after getting people excited with his legs and with his speed. So if I'm Will Stein looking at this quarterback room, I'm feeling so confident that whoever starts, you're going to have some really good weapons. You're going to have a pretty good O-line. Might take some time to gel. But I think just for Oregon, like, I really think that they have a great situation, because if whoever starts, if they get banged up, you're going to have a competent and fairly proven guy to lean on.
You know who else is pretty confident it's Dante is Vegas. I mean, Dante's got the 7th best Heisman odds as of this moment, which is crazy for a guy who didn't really play at all last year, and it makes sense in the context as well. I know listeners are going, it's not crazy because Oregon has had the last 2 quarterbacks, go to New York City for the Heisman Trophy ceremony as finalists, but this is a guy who's just so unproven at this school. I think my big takeaway was similar to what you're talking about in terms of the spring game, which is you go in going, okay, this is a Dante versus Austin battle, and let's just see, like, does one of these guys really stand out from the other? And I don't know if I really think that was what took place. I thought both guys looked really good. And then there was Luke Moga, who just kind of like threw his hat in the ring, where I was really down on him from watching some Oregon Open practice last year. There was just some moments with the accuracy where it was like, it doesn't really look like a Division I quarterback. And then he made some of the better throws in the spring game and was pretty consistent in terms of putting the ball about where he needed to put it. There was, I think, one throw over the middle to, I think, a tight end that was deflected. That was kind of iffy and maybe a little bit of a dangerous ball. But like, the development there feels really significant. And I'm with you that even though it's not going to be in 2025, I don't think, like, I now feel pretty confident that, like, at some point Luke Moga's going to be a very legitimate candidate to be Oregon starting quarterback. So put that off to the side. I do think it's a Dante Austin battle, and I would be really surprised if Austin wins it. And maybe that's mostly just factoring off of, recruiting rankings, off of past accolades. What Dante does have 5 starts at UCLA, so it's not like he hasn't played at all at this level. Austin hasn't played really at all, at least not significant snaps. But I still think it's going to be Dante. But to your point, I also feel like I think there are at least 2 quarterbacks on this team that, if asked to do it or forced to do it, could win like 9 or 10 regular season games as a minimum. Like that have that ability to get this offense churning the way they need to have some success. So, I'm with you that, like, the depth at quarterback is probably better than we'd anticipated, and I still think it's going to be Dante. But I also go, like, Austin doesn't look like a slouch by any means, and give credit to him and to Dante of how they've approached this, of being patient. Like, it's not easy to do in the NIL and the transfer portal era, where there have been, I'm sure, plenty of opportunities, especially for Austin, to say, hey, this isn't looking great. I might not be the guy. Why didn't I go to Baylor, where I was committed at a high school, until I flipped to Oregon? Or why didn't I go to a non-Power 4 school that offers me an opportunity to start right away? Like, I would say the chances don't seem great he's Oregon starting quarterback, but I think it's a real boon for the program that he's feeling comfortable to stick around, at least for this year, to be the backup. And shoot, who knows? Like, if Dante really is going to finish one of the top candidates in the Heisman and maybe makes it to New York City, like, the job might open again in 2026. Who's to say? He's certainly got that sort of talent, and if he puts together a really special season, it could be a one and done. I don't expect that. I don't think most people do, but, like, that doesn't feel like it's totally off the table either.
The case in point, Eric, I think we both agree on it. Like, if we're Oregon, we feel confident that we can get winning football out of these 3 guys. I mean, definitely to different degrees, I think.
Yeah.
I'm not alone, I don't think, in saying that maybe you're not expecting to get a win if you have to trot Luke Moga out there on the road in Happy Valley. But like he's really, I think the improvement in the growth is so evident. And then the wild card, of course, becomes just what happens with Dante, because I think that a lot of people just kind of maybe expected that he was going to be one and done as a starting quarterback at Oregon, but he could very well come back for 2026, and that remains to be seen. So one more topic I want to get into, Erik. I got to tee it up for you here because you kind of had the beat on this one. When you were talking a little bit, I think someone screenshotted it and put it on the message board or on social media, but you were saying that, maybe we're talking about NIL, and just kind of Oregon's approach. And obviously that's really relevant right now because recruiting for the 26 class is on center stage. So just, what do you think about Oregon's approach? And maybe I'll just let you kind of, bring this up because you had the reporting.
Yeah, and I don't want to like overstate the reporting as being coming directly from Oregon's NIL arm because frankly, Max, I think the two of us and probably everyone trying to cover this team doesn't have great sourcing in the NIL department because they don't really want any of that information out there. Here's what I'll say is that I talked to some people, around the Oregon football program, around the Oregon athletic department, especially in the light of what has been like a really bizarre recruiting cycle in 26. Like, your listeners know this, everybody over on our site knows this. Like, it's been kind of a weird, trying year. It's been a roller coaster. They were up to number one back for a little bit, at least on the art rankings at 24/7. And then they've crashed back down into like the 40s and moved back up a little bit. But like people were wondering what's going on. Like, why is this the case? You go back to the last couple cycles, they didn't really have these periods where they peaked and then valleyed so disparately, and I think a significant part of this has been the NIL approach. And, you have to think about when you talk about NIL, you have to understand it's like kind of a three-pronged attack, right? Like you have to retain your players. It's a priority to go get great portal players, and you need to build your high school recruiting class out. So what I was kind of told or suggested by a couple of people is that Oregon's priority right now has been in retention, and its priority has been in adding surefire plug-and-play transfer players. And you look at the roster, they really haven't lost a starter in Dan Lanning's time here, like a surefire elite starter. And I think they've done a great job of using NIL to help kind of reinforce that. And you look at what they've done from a portal perspective, like you could argue they've been just about as good as anybody, certainly, right? Like two quarterbacks that were Heisman Trophy finalists. We talked about they got those guys from the portal. Numerous first-round draft picks, whether it be Christian Gonzalez or Derek Harmon through the transfer portal. A bunch of other guys that went day 2, day 3 in the draft from the portal. I mean, they've really done a great job there. And again, this year's cycle, they did, I think, another home run job of, you look around, you go like, there's 7 or 8 guys that they've added that could theoretically start. But it does seem the recruiting has, from a prep perspective, has started to suffer. And that was what was kind of relayed to me, was that maybe some of the resources haven't been quite as relevant or prevalent, I should say, from a high school recruiting perspective. And I'm not going to say I know all the numbers. Like I said before, I don't know how it's all been kind of spread out. I also know that the House settlement probably complicates matters because of
Definitely
all sorts of stuff that if we wanted to get into like the legality of that, like it's just once again, the landscape is kind of shifting, but the explanation I've gotten, I think, makes sense. And again, I'm not going to report this as 100%. And I don't think Oregon or anybody in that program probably wants to talk about NIL publicly. It's just that like their focus has been on retaining good players and adding more experienced veteran transfers as opposed to the high school recruiting. And that doesn't mean that their high school recruiting is going to be terrible, but it's also an explanation for why they went from, seemingly landing almost everybody they wanted last year to missing on a lot of key guys this year. And then also decommitments. I mean, like 5 or 6 really big time prospects, top 100 guys committing to Oregon and then flipping to other schools.
It's certainly just a complicated world, the NIL world is, and it's changing every day almost, it feels like. So it's not something that we can just hammer down on one podcast, Erik, but I really, am interested in the point, right? Because I've been covering Oregon recruiting for a while, and this is definitely, I think, one of the cycles where they've had the most speed bumps, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to keep everything in perspective because on the one hand, you could say, hey, it looks like Oregon is struggling. They're losing some commitments and they're missing on guys that they don't usually miss. To schools that aren't usually in their stratosphere. And at the same, so you can say that and acknowledge that you have that on one side, and then you have on the other side, hey, we got to get all the way to December. We know that Oregon probably won't present their most competitive NIL offer until it gets closer to signing day, because they pulled off 4-5 flips in the 2025 class, kind of in that November, December range. So that is clearly something that's at play as well. So it's just really you sit back and kind of like wonder, like, Oregon's losing out on guys to Cal, to Washington, guys that they dominate those schools on the recruiting trail. And if it's a guy that Oregon wants, they are going to get that guy 9 times out of 10. I mean, I don't know if 10 times out of 10 is like completely unrealistic to say if we're looking at previous history in the past couple of cycles. But now you have Cody Green, who was like the headliner in Oregon's class at one point, flipped to Washington. Tom Huni-Tapoy flipped to USC. So we know that NIL is it's kind of something that's obviously having a big impact here. And it feels like it's more and more taboo as reporters to kind of talk about it, but it's becoming so above board, I guess you could say, especially with the house settlement coming in a little bit here, that we kind of have to talk about it and ask about it.
Yeah, and that's this last thing I'll say is some level of transparency is needed. Like, and I'm not going to be the one to solve it or tell you what it needs to look like. I just know it's difficult in our space to know how to talk about recruiting without having any details on the contract negotiation part of it. And I'm not saying we need to know like every step of the way, but it would be helpful of like, it's like I've said this a couple times. It would be the equivalent of, hey, I'm covering an NFL team and they sign these players and I have no idea what the terms of the contracts are. I don't know how that, and I don't know what the cap is. I don't know how much money they have to spend, and players are being added, but I don't know. That's where we are. You know what I mean? And I know it's happened quickly because, gosh, 5 years ago, you couldn't pay players at all. And like none of this stuff was completely all off the table, very much illegal. You get, this is kind of the origin of getting, bowl suspensions and all that. Now it's part of the game. And at some level, we do need to have a sense of like, hey, Oregon, maybe not what they're looking like in losing offers, but at least a sense of like, okay, when they do get, I'll throw out Emmanuel Iheanacho, a big prospect that they're in on, and he does commit, to have some sense of like what's being passed on and how that commitment came to be, because the traditional recruitment still remains very much a part of it. That's something that I've been told by everybody I talk to in the recruiting industry. Like, you still have to go through the process of building the relationships, building the connections. Unfortunately, though, now there is the dollar sign that has to be kind of met, and it's hard to know how to really talk about these things in the right proper context without having at least some sense of the financials and what's going on.
Exactly. I mean, I feel like I couldn't have said it better myself. It's an interesting time because, like, I feel like I want to share transparently, with the audience. Like, this is new stuff. Like, we kind of are learning more about how to report on this. And to your point, Erik, it's like you can talk to the recruit, you can talk to coaches, source, like whatever. If you don't have some kind of an idea of what the NIL prospects are looking like on the table, like, you really maybe don't have the full picture. So
Yeah.
it's really challenging, but it also is kind of fun because it makes our jobs, at least, like, you're more of an investigative reporter in that light. So it's interesting. It definitely makes it frustrating to follow at times because you think a guy's going to go somewhere, and then at the 11th hour, oh, here comes a prediction for this school, whatever it might be. I thought I had one more point I was going to add on that, but it's just a crazy time at the end of the day. And I think for Oregon, okay, I just remembered it. Like, it looked like they had roster retention, portal, and prep recruiting. Like, all of those boxes were checked. And now, in June at least, it's June, it feels like, you're checking 2 boxes with pen and then maybe pencil mark checking the third. Maybe that's an easy way to say it, but it's still early and like so much is going to happen. There's football to be played. And we need to see how NIL shakes out, but it's just a crazy time. And I'm honestly here for all of it because I have to be. We have to be.
We don't have, I was saying, what choice do we have? There's no way there's literally no way to talk recruiting without at least bringing up NIL. And even if it's like the elephant in the room that we don't have answers for, there's just no way to do this without at least bringing up, like, there's got to be some impacts of whatever the financial packages look like from school X, Y, or Z.
Well, we could easily go an hour, Erik, but so I got to bring you back on soon. But I think we're gonna wrap it there for today. Before we get out of here, just let the viewers know where they can get more of you.
Yeah, come over and check out my work at duckterritory.com. Matt Preem, Jared Mack, and I also run our own podcast, The Odds and Audibles. I guarantee if you enjoyed listening to Max, you'll enjoy some of our conversations, a lot of similar kind of topics and things that we hit. So go check that out. Trying to think here. I guess you could follow me on social media. Do people still pimp that stuff out? I don't even know if it's worthwhile anymore. But
I do.
yeah.
I always plug it at the end.
Yeah, I'm over on I guess X and Blue Sky. Some variation of my name, Erik, I think _Skopil on X, and frankly, the Blue Sky thing is new, so I couldn't tell you what the actual handle is, but I'm pretty sure you can find me just by searching my name.
There you go. There you go. We'll tap in with Erik. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me anywhere at Torres Sports. Been trying to hammer in on TikTok a bit more lately. Subscribe to the ScoopDuck on 3 YouTube channel if you guys have been sticking around watching us on YouTube, and then share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with everybody you know, and come and see us at ScoopDuck.com. Engage with us on the message board and check out all of our awesome content, the On3 app, this, that, and the third. But big thank you to Erik for his time, and thank you to you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.